The evening sky was a watercolor canvas splashed with hues of soft pink and lavender. Lela stood outside the grand ballroom, arm in arm with Michael. The marble archway of the entry was draped with their old school colors, royal blue and white. Underneath, a gilded plaque read, 10th Anniversary High School Reunion. "Are you nervous?" Michael asked, squeezing her hand gently. He looked dashing in his tailored suit, a perfect fit for the formal setting. "Not one bit," Lela replied with a soft smile, but the slight tremble of her fingers betrayed her. She was an elegant woman, with eyes the color of warm honey, and a laughter that could light up the darkest of rooms. Michael admired her strength, her grace, and the love they had nurtured over the years. They entered the ballroom hand in hand, and were greeted by a sea of familiar faces. Old classmates, some barely recognizable, others who hadn't changed at all, greeted them. Laughter, clinking glasses, and reminiscing filled the air. It was like stepping into a memory, only this time they weren't gangly teenagers, but adults who'd traversed life's uneven path for a decade. Among the crowd, a pair of ice-blue eyes watched them. Jake. He had been their classmate, Lela's close friend once upon a time. His friendship with Lela had faltered, and then disappeared altogether when Michael and Lela became an item. There was an incident, a misunderstanding that Michael had played a part in, but nothing so grave that a reunion couldn't mend it, or so they thought. Jake was different now, grown up like the rest of them, but his eyes still held the same icy hue that could unsettle you if you looked too long. He was no longer the lanky teenager from high school, but a man with sharp features and a stern countenance. As Lela and Michael made their way through the crowd, they spotted Jake. Their eyes met, and Jake offered a tight smile. "Lela, Michael," he greeted, nodding his head in acknowledgement. "Jake," Michael responded, his tone civil. Lela echoed the greeting, her voice filled with a curious mix of surprise and warmth. It had been a long time, and Jake was a piece of their shared past that had faded into the background. Now, he was back in the foreground, stirring up old memories and an uneasy air of anticipation. The evening proceeded, with stories from their past echoing off the grand ballroom walls, tales of teenage pranks, heartaches, and dreams. Yet, amidst the laughter and joyous clinks of champagne glasses, the glint in Jake's icy blue eyes suggested a narrative that wasn't just about school days and innocent crushes. A deeper, darker tale that started in those hallways a decade ago and was destined to conclude in a way none of them could foresee. By the time the reunion was in full swing, it seemed the past had returned not just to be remembered, but to cast its long, ominous shadow over the present. The story of Lela, Michael, and Jake was about to unravel, its dark threads looming ominously over their seemingly happy lives, and at the heart of it was a conflict, a grudge that had been buried, waiting for the right time to surface. The ballroom buzzed with the echo of their past, as forgotten stories came to life, animated by the vigorous narrations of the old classmates. Lela and Michael found themselves laughing, reminiscing about their youthful follies and missteps. But among the crowd, Jake stood apart, his icy gaze focused on the happy couple. Throughout the night, Jake inserted himself into their conversations, subtly encroaching upon the world they'd built. He brought up old memories, shared jokes, long-forgotten incidents, and past conversations only he and Lela could understand. Michael played along, masking his unease with polite laughter. Jake's unexpected presence had stirred up an unsettled feeling within him. As the night advanced, and the spirits flowed more freely, Michael's demeanor towards Jake gradually altered. He seemed to take on a role, a character that was far removed from the mature, compassionate man Lela knew. He began to ridicule Jake, picking up from their high school dynamic where he had often assumed a superior role. "Remember when Jake tried to run for school president?" Michael said, laughing, a glass of whiskey in his hand. "Poor chap couldn't even get his speech right." The room erupted in laughter. Jake's face turned a shade darker, but he kept his composure, forcing a laugh. Lela looked at Michael, surprised at his harshness. Throughout the night, Michael's jibes at Jake continued. They were subtle digs, disguised as jests, stories spun to paint Jake as the underdog. It was as if they were back in high school, with Michael the charismatic sports star and Jake the awkward introvert. Only now the power dynamic seemed less innocent, more menacing. Lela felt uncomfortable. This was not the Michael she knew. She found herself drawn towards Jake, the friend from her past who had been subjected to this humiliation. Despite his aloof exterior, Jake was holding on to a deep sense of hurt. His eyes revealed a storm brewing, fueled by the sharp sting of Michael's words. She approached Jake, intending to smooth over the rough edges that the night had frayed. "Jake, I'm sorry about—" "No need, Lela," Jake interjected, a strained smile on his face. "It's all in good fun, right?" But Lela could see the hurt in his eyes. The humiliation had ignited the smoldering embers of their past conflict. It was clear that the night had reopened wounds that were far from healed. Little did they know that this was the tipping point, the catalyst for a sequence of horrifying events that would shatter their lives forever. By the time the reunion ended and everyone began to trickle out of the grand ballroom, a palpable tension hung in the air. Jake's departing glance towards Lela and Michael held a cryptic message. It was a look of promise, a promise of settling scores. As the high school reunion drew to a close, their past, intertwined with unresolved issues and simmering resentments, had made a dramatic comeback, threatening to upend the happiness they'd built over the years. The conflict that had once seemed insignificant was now a monster lurking in the shadows, ready to leap out and devour the tranquility of their life. The stage was set for a chilling act of revenge, and the curtain was just about to rise. The drive back home was quiet. Lela and Michael were absorbed in their thoughts, the lively chatter of the reunion replaced by the steady hum of the car's engine. Michael's hand rested on Lela's, a silent acknowledgement of the tension that the evening had stirred up. "The reunion went well, don't you think?" Michael asked, breaking the silence. Lela looked at him, her eyes searching his face. "Yes, except—" She paused, unsure if she should voice her thoughts. Michael sighed. He knew what she was referring to. "I was harsh on Jake. I shouldn't have done that," he confessed. Their home, nestled in a quiet suburban neighborhood, was a charming two-story house. Michael had lovingly designed the house when they got married. The living room opened to a lovely patio overlooking a lush garden, a space they both cherished. Upstairs, their bedroom was a sanctuary, a place of comfort and peace. Little did they know that this sanctuary would soon be tainted with terror. After they arrived home, the couple retreated to their bedroom. As Lela prepared for bed, Michael stood by the window, looking out into the darkness. "I think I'll apologize to Jake tomorrow," he said. Lela nodded, appreciating his willingness to rectify his mistake. Unbeknownst to them, as they drifted off to sleep, a shadow lurked outside their home. The street was silent, save for the occasional rustle of leaves. The figure, shrouded in darkness, moved stealthily towards the house. Jake had followed them, his plan of retribution taking a dreadful form. He entered through a side window, his movements quiet and precise. His gaze darted around the unfamiliar territory, eyes taking in every detail. He ascended the stairs, the eerie silence of the house amplifying the thud of his heart. A cold, cruel smile formed on his lips as he approached their bedroom door. Michael woke to a strange sound. It was a faint thud, like someone was moving about. His protective instincts kicked in, and he decided to investigate. "Stay here," he whispered to Lela, who was stirring awake. She nodded, her sleepy eyes filled with confusion and concern. The house was dark, save for the silvery moonlight filtering in through the windows. Michael moved cautiously, the unsettling feeling growing stronger with each step. When he turned the corner, he came face to face with Jake. "Jake?" Michael stammered, shock replacing his initial fear. But before he could react further, Jake lunged at him, a gleaming knife in his hand. Michael barely had a chance to defend himself. Jake's movements were swift, ruthless. The sharp pain seared through him, his own gasps echoing around the house. He fell to the floor, his life seeping away onto the polished wood. Jake stood over him, panting heavily, the anger in his eyes replaced by a terrifying calmness. As Michael's life extinguished, Jake slipped back into the shadows, leaving behind a horrifying scene of revenge. Lela woke up to the unsettling quiet. "Michael?" she called out, her voice echoing in the chilling silence. She got out of bed, slipping into her robe, and descended the stairs. The scene that met her eyes was gruesome. Michael lay in a pool of blood, lifeless. Her heart pounded in her chest, her entire world crumbling around her. In a moment of panic, she ran back upstairs, a strangled cry escaping her lips. She locked herself in their bedroom, shaking with uncontrollable terror. The house felt sinister, the comfortable sanctuary turning into a house of horrors. Lela tried to think, her mind racing. Who could have done this? And then, a chilling realization dawned upon her. Jake. The door creaked open and Jake stepped into the room. Lela froze, her blood turning to ice. He held up his hands in a placating gesture. "Calm down, Lela, I don't want to hurt you," he said, his voice smooth. His calmness, in contrast to the situation, was unnerving. "What did you do?" Lela cried out, her voice barely a whisper. Jake explained. He told her about the incident back in high school, a memory that she had barely thought of. A rumor that Michael had spread about Jake, a lie so damaging that it had ostracized him from his friends, ruined his reputation, a lie that led Lela into Michael's arms and away from Jake. "He took you away from me, Lela," he confessed. His words echoed in the room, a bitter truth that she had been oblivious to. His confession left her reeling. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the hurt and betrayal. Jake was not the old friend she remembered. He was a man bent on revenge, the man who had taken away the love of her life. "But we can go back, Lela. We can go back to the good old times, just you and me," Jake proposed, his tone eerily calm. The horror of his words crashed over her like a tidal wave. Lela looked at him, disbelief etching her face. "You're a murderer, Jake," she whispered. "I could never. I won't." Jake's face hardened, the rejection igniting a spark of madness in his eyes. "You will regret this, Lela," he seethed, the last remnants of his composure slipping away. He approached her, the darkness in his soul mirrored in his eyes. In that dimly lit room, something shattered within Jake. His face twisted into a grotesque mask of rage and despair. He let out a guttural scream that rattled the very air. This was not the Jake Lela had known, but an entity consumed by vengeance and heartbreak. He advanced towards Lela, who was cowering against the wall. "If I can't have my old life back, neither can you," he snarled. His hands closed around her neck. She fought, her nails digging into his arms, but her strength was waning. As the room started to darken, her last thoughts were of Michael and the life they had built together. Lela's consciousness faded away. When Lela awoke, she was surrounded by darkness. A suffocating weight pressed down on her. Her breaths were short and the air was stale. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. She was in a coffin, buried alive. As she struggled in vain against her earthen prison, her mind whirled back to the night's events. Jake's madness, Michael's lifeless eyes, and her own impotent struggle against Jake. The terror was overpowering, a living nightmare from which there was no awakening. Above ground, Jake stood over Lela's grave. His face was empty, devoid of any semblance of humanity. He had exacted his revenge, but as he turned to leave, a wave of emptiness washed over him. He had lost everything, too. He was a ghost, condemned to roam the earth with the weight of his actions bearing down on his soul. In the stillness of the night, a soft whisper rustled through the trees surrounding Leila's resting place. It was a voice that hadn't been there before, a voice filled with love and sorrow. "Lela," it whispered. In the coffin, Lela, still fighting against the suffocating darkness, felt a sudden calm envelop her. A gentle touch, as ethereal as moonlight, brushed against her hand. "Michael?" she whispered, her voice echoing in the confined space. "Michael, is that you?" she repeated, her voice growing desperate. But there was no response, only the chilling silence of her earthen tomb. Leila's mind raced, the sanity she had been desperately clinging to starting to slip. She was hearing things. It was the isolation, the pitch-black darkness, the hopelessness. She was losing herself. She let out a maddening laugh that echoed off the wooden confines of her coffin. "Michael?" she whispered again, her voice filled with the raw pain of her delusion. She clawed at the coffin, her nails scratching against the wood in a futile attempt to escape. Her breaths became ragged, each gasp for air becoming more difficult than the last. Her thoughts spiraled into chaos, the voices in her head growing louder, drowning her in their madness. "Michael, I'm coming," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. And as she drew her last breath, her mind shattered, consumed by the darkness of insanity. And with that, the story Journey Below concludes. The revenge had taken its toll, and in its wake it left a horrifying echo of love and madness, a tale of a reunion, a deadly encounter, and an eternal descent into the abyss of the mind.